in 1955. The records exist in the federal census of 1960 and in the tax filings of the period. The trade required no medical school, no four-year university degree, and no graduate certification of any kind from any American institution to enter or to operate successfully. It required an apprenticeship, a steady hand, and the patience to learn metal finishing, stockwork, and precision fitting across 5 to 10 years of dedicated daily practice. The trade had been practiced continuously in America since the first Pennsylvania long rifles were built in Lancaster County in the 1720s by German immigrant craftsmen. For more than 200 years, the working gunsmith was a respected and well-paid professional in every American community across the country at every level of working society. Then, the college lobby of the late 1970s and the 1980s decided that the trade should be quietly removed from polite professional conversation in American schools. The trade did not disappear, but it was pushed out of vocational schools, out of guidance counseling brochures. This is the working gunsmith trade, and it earned its reputation honestly across 3 centuries before the brochures stopped mentioning it as a career path for motivated young people. Welcome to Forgotten Trades Vault. Before we open this vault, hit subscribe so the next archive finds its way to you. This video focuses entirely on the history of the gunsmithing trade, the economics of the working shops. We discuss repair, restoration, customization, finishing, and the small business side of the trade as it has operated across 300 years of American history. We do not discuss firearm manufacturing, modification of regulated parts, or any subject that would require specific federal licensing beyond a standard federal firearms license for routine work. The archive opens in 1728 in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, when the modern American gunsmithing trade first organized into a coherent regional cluster of working shops. In 1728, Lancaster County was home to a growing community of German-speaking immigrant craftsmen who had brought their gunsmithing traditions from the Black Forest and the Rhineland. Those craftsmen began producing what would become known as the Pennsylvania long rifle, also called the Kentucky rifle in popular American history texts and museum displays. The Pennsylvania long rifle was the first distinctly American firearm, with a slender octagonal barrel, a graceful curly maple stock, and a precise rifled bore for accuracy at long range. The rifling gave it accuracy far beyond the smooth-bore muskets of the era. The men who built those rifles signed their work with engraved patch boxes and inlaid silver, and their names are still recognized by collectors today across the American antique market. Names like John Armstrong, Jacob Dickert, and the Henry family of Bolton became the brand names of the early American firearms trade across the colonies and the early states. A single Pennsylvania long rifle in the 1780s took between 3 weeks and 3 months to build by hand from raw iron, raw wood, and brass or silver fittings. The barrel was forged from iron, rifled by hand with a pull-through cutter. The rifling process alone could take a skilled craftsman 2 full days of patient work. The stock was carved from a single piece of maple, often selected for the figure of the wood grain. A piece of figured maple curly enough to make a presentation grade. Rifle stock was a rare find. The lock was either imported from England or fitted from parts forged by the gunsmith himself. The trigger guard, patch box, butt plate, and side plate were all hand-cut from sheet brass or silver. A finished Pennsylvania long rifle was a working tool, a piece of fine furniture, and a family heirloom all at the same time, with many surviving examples still functioning today. The trade spread west with the American frontier, with Tennessee, Kentucky, Ohio, Virginia, and the Carolinas, all developing regional gunsmithing traditions during the 18th and 19th centuries. Daniel Boone himself owned a Pennsylvania long rifle built by a gunsmith named John Shrite of Lancaster County, with the rifle accompanying him on his frontier expeditions across multiple decades. Davy Crockett carried a rifle built by James Graham of Greene County, Tennessee, with both rifles becoming historical artifacts that survive in museum collections to this day. The American frontier was opened in large part by the gunsmiths who built the tools that made the expansion possible across the 18th and 19th centuries of westward movement. By the time of the American Civil War, the United States supported thousands of working gunsmiths who built, repaired, and customized firearms for civilian and military customers across both armies. The Industrial Revolution did not kill the trade, with the mass production of military firearms by Colt, Remington, Springfield Armory, and Winchester actually expanding the work available to independent gunsmiths. Factory production drove down the cost of basic firearms and put rifles, shotguns. Every one of those factory weapons eventually needed repair, custom fitting, or specialized work that the factory itself could not provide economically through its standardized production lines. The factories produced standard rifles, shotguns, and revolvers, while the independent gunsmith customized those weapons, repaired them when they broke, and built custom rifles for selective customers. By the federal census of 1910, the United States counted approximately 15,000 working independent gunsmiths, distributed across every state and territory in the country at the time. By 1950, the number had grown to nearly 30,000, with the trade thriving in every American region that had a strong hunting, shooting, or sporting culture. Pennsylvania, New York, Ohio, Texas, Colorado, and the Carolinas each supported between 1,000 and 3,000 working gunsmiths in the post-war years across the country. A senior gunsmith in 1955 earned between $12,000 and $20,000 a year, against a median American household income of about $4,800. The average physician in private practice in a small town earned between $10,000 and $15,000 in the same period, putting the master gunsmith above many local doctors. The master gunsmith, working alone in a shop he owned outright, often out-earned the country doctor in his county, the local lawyer, and the bank manager in his town. He answered to no one above him in any organizational chart and owned the shop, the inventory, and the customer relationships outright across his entire working career as a craftsman. His customers were local hunters, target shooters, military officers, law enforcement officers, and collectors who trusted him with valuable family firearms across multiple generations of relationship. The trade had its own training pipeline through this period, with several American institutions specializing in formal gunsmithing instruction for motivated graduating high school seniors. The Trinidad State Junior College in Colorado, founded in 1946, became one of the most respected formal gunsmithing programs in the country across the next 8 decades. The Colorado School of Trades, founded in 1947, ran a similar program with strong industry placement, producing working gunsmiths for shops across the western United States. The Lassen Community College in California, the Yavapai College in Arizona, and the Pennsylvania Gunsmith School in Pittsburgh all trained working gunsmiths through the post-war period. The American Gunsmithing Institute, founded in 1981, produced video and correspondence training that supplemented the formal college programs across the country for distant students. The Society of American Gunsmiths, an independent professional association, certified working journeyman gunsmiths and maintained a registry of training opportunities across the American working trade economy. The major American firearms manufacturers ran their own factory training programs at company level, with Smith and Wesson, Colt, Remington, Winchester, and Ruger all certifying gunsmiths. By the late 1960s, more than 2,000 new students were entering formal gunsmithing programs each year, with the trade producing a steady stream of qualified working professionals. The trade had a future and a clear path that any motivated young person could follow without student loan debt or four-year college tuition costs to absorb after graduation. The training was rigorous, the work was honest, and the pay justified the effort required to master the craft across 5 to 10 years of dedicated daily practice. Then came the cultural shift that this channel has documented across so many other American trades. The vocational counseling literature of the late 1970s and the 1980s was clear and coordinated in its treatment of the working gunsmith trade across American schools. The gunsmith was framed in the language of the period. Some counseling manuals warned that the trade was politically unfashionable and that prospective students should consider it carefully before committing to a career in the field. The federal vocational education funding formulas were rewritten in 1976 and again in 1984, with federal money flowing away from small specialty trades. The Department of Education classified gunsmithing as a low-growth occupation, the same classification it gave to millwork, smithing, and several other specialty trades of the era. The classification had little to do with actual market demand for the trade, which continued steady at a small but stable level across the next several decades of operation. It had a great deal to do with the cultural priorities of the bureaucracy that issued the federal vocational funding to American schools across the next 2 decades. The high school programs that had once introduced rural and small-town teenagers to the trade began to disappear, state by state and district by district across the country. The colleges that continued to offer formal gunsmithing instruction did so largely without federal support, funded by tuition and by private industry partnerships across the next 40 years. By the year 2000, the number of accredited American gunsmithing programs had fallen below 10, kept alive primarily by enthusiast demand rather than by institutional support. By 2020, the number was holding steady at roughly the same level. The trade survived, but it survived in spite of the system rather than because of it. Who benefited from this rearrangement of the American working trade landscape during the federal vocational funding shifts of the late 20th century period? The universities benefited, as they did from every other trade buried in the same period, with the federal student loan portfolio growing to $1.7 trillion today. Every senior in every public school in America was being aimed at that market, rather than at the registered apprenticeship pipeline that had served the trade for centuries before. The gunsmith was not in the brochure. The cost was paid by an entire generation of rural American teenagers who would have thrived in the trade and never knew it existed as an option for them. A boy in rural Pennsylvania or Tennessee or West Virginia in 1985 had grown up around firearms, hunting, and the small-town shop culture that supported them. That boy would have made an excellent gunsmith with the cultural background, the manual skills, and the interest in firearms that the trade requires for success at the journeyman level. Instead, he was told to consider community college or a 4-year university, where he could study fields with no connection to the things he actually understood from his upbringing. The cost was also paid by the American shooting and hunting community, which began to find fewer and fewer working gunsmiths in every county across the country. A custom rifle that would have been built locally by a working gunsmith in 1960 was no longer available in many counties by the year 2000. Customers were forced to order from one of a handful of specialty shops in distant states. A simple repair, like replacing a broken extractor or refitting a worn trigger, became hard to find in many parts of the country. The trade did not die. The trade was crowded out of polite professional conversation, while the actual demand for skilled gunsmithing services continued to grow across the broader market. Now open the archive on the present, where the working gunsmith trade still operates in every American region, with surviving shops serving customer bases that extend across multiple states. The Bureau of Labor Statistics does not maintain a separate category for gunsmiths in its Occupational Outlook Handbook. Industry estimates from the National Shooting Sports Foundation suggest there are between 15,000 and 20,000 working gunsmiths operating in the United States today. The actual demand for the work is significantly higher than that supply. A senior gunsmith with 5 to 10 years of experience working in a small independent shop commonly earns between $60,000 and $100,000 a year. A specialist in custom rifle building who works with collectors and competitive shooters regularly earns between $100,000 and $150,000 annually on commission work. A specialist in fine engraving and metal finishing, restoring high-end and collector firearms, can bill between $200 and $400 an hour. The market for fine engraving on collector firearms has been growing steadily for 30 years, driven by an aging population of high-net-worth collectors with discretionary spending power. A single engraved presentation rifle can require 300 to 800 hours of labor and command a final price between $50,000 and $200,000. A specialist in vintage and antique restoration, serving museums, collectors, and the high-end auction market, takes contracts that can run into the tens of thousands of dollars per project. A shop owner who handles routine repair and maintenance work for a steady local customer base can clear a comfortable middle-class income from a single-chair operation in any. The work is recession-proof in a way most office work has never been. The pandemic of 2020 actually increased demand for gunsmithing services, with Americans purchasing firearms in record numbers, and many of those purchases requiring custom fitting or repair work. The National Shooting Sports Foundation reported that more than 20 million firearms were purchased in the United States in 2020 alone, driving sustained demand of the trade. Many of those buyers were first-time owners who needed professional help with fitting, sighting, and basic maintenance from a qualified working gunsmith in their county or region. The shops that survived the lean years of the 1990s and 2000s suddenly had waiting lists that extended 6 and 12 months out across the early 2020s. The arrival of large language models in 2022 and 2023 did not threaten a single working American gunsmith in any town or city across the country. A language model can describe how to fit a barrel to a receiver. The hand that fits, finishes, regulates, and tests a working firearm is still the only tool that does this work, and no software has come close to replacing it. The path back into the trade is shorter than the path through any 4-year college program, with several major American schools still operating formal training programs for serious students. The Colorado School of Trades, Trinidad State College, Pennsylvania Gunsmith School, and Lassen Community College all still operate formal programs for prospective working gunsmiths. A full-time program typically runs between 1 and 2 years, with tuition between $5,000 and $20,000 total. A direct apprenticeship with a working shop, paid from day one, remains a common path for motivated students who want to enter the trade without formal school enrollment. The federal firearms license process is a separate regulatory step that any working gunsmith must complete. with paperwork managed through the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. The license is straightforward for any qualified applicant with a clean background, but it does require time and attention to detail across the application and inspection process. The American Gunsmithing Association and the National Rifle Association both maintain directories of working shops and educational programs for prospective students across the country. The entry wage for a new gunsmith apprentice in 2025 sits between $35,000 and $45,000 a year. Within 3 to 5 years, a gunsmith who specializes in custom building, restoration, or competitive shooting work routinely earns between $80,000 and $140,000. The Lancaster County gunsmithing tradition is now preserved primarily by hobbyists, collectors, and a small number of professional craftspeople who serve a discerning customer base across the region. The trade has not been buried, but it has been crowded out of polite mainstream conversation in American schools and career counseling for 2 full working generations. But the trade is not dead. The trade was never the problem, and the cultural framing was the problem across the federal vocational shifts of the late 20th century period. And every cultural framing can be revisited by the person standing at the bench, files in hand, ready to learn a trade that supported American craftsmen for 300 years. If this vault opened something for you, leave a comment with the trade you wish your school had taught you instead of college prep. The next vault holds a trade that built the physical structures of American cities for 2 centuries, out-earning the average office worker across most of the 20th century. The Bureau of Labor Statistics still confirms strong demand for the trade in 2026, even as American schools have quietly removed it from the curriculum almost entirely. The next vault opens soon.